I thought I'd start by reading the whole and brief description of our responsibilities and duties as it's in the code, because I think, especially if there's three of us and there's some confusion about why we exist. So I'll do that.
Maybe closer.
Short people got no reason to live. Okay, the board shall act as the planning body in charge of all library activities of the municipality, including but not limited to operation of principal and branch libraries now existing or hereafter established, mobile library services, special library projects such as radio and television projects, this is written a while ago, and any and all other library functions. 2, we make recommendations to the administration and to the assembly for the adoption, change, repeal, or alteration of rules, regulations, restrictions on library services, and all other matters directly or indirectly affecting the municipal library programs. We also perform such other powers and duties as the assembly may refer to from time to time, and review annually the library budget and its operations. That's it. So in other words, beyond that simple but pretty broad scope of work, the Library Advisory Board gives advice on all things library, including rules, regulations, restrictions on library services, such as closing hours on Sunday at LUSAC, and all other matters directly or indirectly affecting municipal library program. In addition to the advisory rule, we're guided by all other rules under Title IV of the Municipal Code. Maybe that's your second question. Am I skipping ahead?
It is, but that's fine.
Okay. We're also guided in terms of tasks and priorities by a variety of strategic plans, visual aids here, which I think, which the lab has of course been centrally involved in producing since we're a planning board. This is all kind of dry, I know, but we take our planning and advisory responsibilities seriously. I think I can speak for the entire board by saying that we are serious people with a serious purpose, and that is to help shape a library that is fully functional and fully committed to the three-pronged job we have to provide, excuse me, education and skills for life, a bridge to information and resources, and building community so that we're accessible and useful to all community members. As it says in our strategic plan, we are to connect Anchorage residents to each other to build a more inclusive and accepting community. I believe that takes me to the next question, so go ahead.
Thank you. And so we'll go ahead and move on to Ms. Hayes, and feel free also to address the question about policies or documents that guide your work and your role with the library.
All right. Can you hear me, everybody? Okay. My name is Kim Hayes. I am the president of the Anchorage Library Foundation, been on the board since 2016 and have served as president since 2019. So the Anchorage Library Foundation is a private nonprofit foundation. So we are not a municipally appointed board or anything like that, but we're a private foundation. We were incorporated in 1982, so in the height of Project 80s, by some big names in the Anchorage community, Wilda Marston, Eric Wolforth, Arlister Jaluski, Arnie Espy, and Wilda Hudson. So we are filling the shoes of some great Anchorage residents. Our main purpose in the 80s and to today is long-term planning and capital, raising capital for library projects. Our mission is actually very, very simple. It's to promote, fund, and support the long-term vitality of the Anchorage Public Library. We're a 15-member board. We are all volunteers, so that's one thing to note. The 15 members right now all volunteer. What we do on a day-to-day basis, our number one thing that we do to complete that mission is good stewardship of a very large endowment for a downtown library, other buckets of money like that. We have planned giving that we work on, and then we have individual donors that we're reaching out to get fundraising going for the library. It's mainly focused on those big long-term capital projects, but we do also work with library staff on mini grants, things, immediate needs that they see in the library. During the height of COVID and right in 2020, when the branches had to shut down, we worked hard with library staff to get fundraising going for MiFi so people could have access to internet at home. So those are the kind of things where we're fast moving in that regard, but also we're looking towards the long-term sustainability of the public library system. We work really closely with the LAB and the FOL, as we call ourselves, so Friends of the Library, Library Advisory Board, so that we're all on the up and up on what's happening at the library. As you can imagine, the general public views all of us as the library, so we get a lot of questions, and it's a good opportunity to explain why we exist. But one of our other secondary goals is to make sure we're always marketing the library, always selling the library to all residents. The way we interface with the library, we have regular meetings that library leadership attend, so we're always keeping in contact. And then the policies that guide us, there are copies at the front, but we have two things. We have a strategic plan that we update every single year, but it is a 5-year strategic plan. It has our mission, vision, and values in there, which I went over relatively briefly. The other meat of this plan are the priority projects that we're working on. Of course, we have our own mission and vision, but those projects are obviously needing to be based on what the public library vision for priorities are as well. So we work together with the library to figure those out. And then it also has our tasks in there. So this is our day-to-day guiding document. Every time we have a meeting, every month, we look over this to make sure we're staying within our mission and that we're up on our work tasks. So this is kind of like the thing we pull out. The other important guiding document is what Chair LaFrance mentioned, and that was the memorandum of understanding that we have with both the municipality and with the library. And this is from 2018, so it's still valid because it's within the 5 years. The basis of this document is that, and on our end, what we see as the biggest value, of course, is that we have an agreement where there are library staff who do some admin and fundraising duties for us. And the impetus for this is just looking back at how much money we can raise for the library and how this is a good investment, a good public-private partnership, because our fundraising brings in millions. We help with capital projects, the first phase of the LUSAC, second phase LUSAC, Girdwood project, everything. And so a little bit of time of library staff is dedicated to kind of being a liaison, making sure our donor checks are going in, helping us send out our donor letter, because like I said, we're all volunteers. So this is an important document as well as we count on these services.
Thank you, Ms. Hayes. Ms. Rasmussen?
Thank you very much. I'm Mary Rasmussen, President of Friends of the Library, and I'm just going to give you a little background of our organization. Friends of the Library is a grassroots membership organization. We're a 501c3, and our goals are to increase the visibility of the library, add to the collection, be it electronic or tangible books, and support library activities and programs. We also have MOAs with the municipality. We had one starting back in 1990, and then we have a new one in 2018 also, which is for a 5-year range. Ours has been going relatively well. Recently, we've had a couple issues with security where they basically wouldn't, after the book sale, we wanted to take our cash registers and things up to our office on the 4th floor, and they wouldn't take us up there because we weren't library employees. And so we had to come back on our own time the next day to finish out closing down the book sale. And another one, which is actually a little bit funny, is I guess there's a new policy that I don't know anything about that you're not supposed to have more than one bag. And I was carrying in 2 bags of things, and security said, "You have 2 bags." And I said, "Yes." And the other security guard said, "Let her go up." And I was taking things up to our office. So those things can be cleaned up fairly easily. What Friends of the Library does is it raises money to support the library. The foundations builds for the future, builds for the brick and mortar. We do bring the money in, spend it on the library. And prior to the pandemic, we were giving anywhere between 85 and 100,000 yearly to the Anchorage Library. And so we're feeling really good about that. And before the pandemic, we were the total funding for all programs at the library. Now, one of the things that Kim said is we keep hearing from people about things that aren't right or things that they aren't happy with. And I'm certainly not going to start into some character assassination or a diatribe. But there's 2 things that are near and dear to my heart, which is our 2 biggest fundraising events are the Beyond the Stacks Gala and our book sales. And this year with our Beyond the Stacks, we got a response back, and the person returned their invitation and said, when the library is, I will come back when the library is on steady ground. And then with the book sale, we also got one of our invitations back and said they would rejoin Friends of the Library when there's a professional library in charge. So there's issues that are out there. And I just really briefly like to take off my library, my hat for Friends of the Library president, because I have been on the library advisory board until I termed out. I've been on the foundation, and now I'm president of Friends. I was appointed to the library advisory board by Mayor Wirch. So I have actually, in these 3 organizations, served under 7 mayors. And one of my board members did a little research about the librarian. And since the late 70s, when Mr. Revelle was the librarian, we've had two quote librarians who were not librarians. And the first one was Faye Alexiev, who was a very smart, capable manager. No criticism of her, but after 9 months, she realized she didn't understand the library, so she resigned. The second one was Tim Lynch, and he served for just over a year and then came to the same conclusion. So when people don't understand the library, they have been short-term, and that's not healthy for the library itself. I was on the library advisory board when AR 2002-158 was sent to the assembly as for qualifications. And I'm just a library volunteer and would like to do anything I can help to make the library stronger.
Thank you, Ms. Rasmussen. So I have 2 other questions, but I have a first, Mr. Constant in the queue.
Thank you. Mary, you mentioned that you were stopped by security for having 2 bags and then you were let in. So you were actually allowed to proceed. So have you heard or seen of that policy being implemented?
I did not know that was a policy. We've carried stuff up to our office for years, and no one has ever said anything. So this, you can't have 2 bags, was a new thing for me.
Right. And so my concern is that it sounds like there's an unequal application of that policy. If they're allowing you to carry in 2 bags, but they're not allowing somebody who fits a certain other quality or characteristic to carry in 2 bags. And that raises a number of concerns to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is this the point where we're asking questions before we move on?
Well, just to let the body know, the other 2 questions I was going to ask our guests is the current fluctuation in library leadership, staffing, and service levels affecting your organization in any way? And then for the Library Advisory Board, a question about how our board members recruited and selected, and if there has been a change in process with the new administration. So
you can put me in after you ask those 2
Okay.
questions. Thanks.
Okay, so then going back to the questions, the first on the current fluctuation in library leadership, staffing, and service levels, is it affecting your organization in any way? And then a specific question afterwards for the Library Advisory Board.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As to the first question, given what I've already described as our roles and responsibilities, I did take it upon myself to write a memo to the administration and the assembly, and of course, send it to the lab members, that we have not been able to perform all those functions I described because we just lack information. I need to point out that I did not represent all members of the library board in that memo. It was over my signature principally. Primarily, I'm concerned that there are several critical issues affecting the library's ability to effectively serve our community, that inclusive and accepting community. For instance, we have a significant number of vacancies listed. Also, there was a decision, which I mentioned before, made recently to shut down hours on Sunday in the LUSAC. And of course, there's been a selection of a new library director. These are all critical, impactful issues that have been decided without the advice of the advisory board and our knowledge or input. The Library Advisory Board is essentially a group of bookworms. We start every meeting, ask what people have read, and share information about that. Our hidden agenda is, I think, not very hidden at all. We simply want to advise the administration and the assembly on all things having to do with the library, which is what the municipal code tells us to do. But we're seriously hampered to do so because decisions continue to be made without us. I think we could be much more helpful in all those regards given half a chance.
Thank you. Ms. Hayes?
Thank you, Chair. Once again, Kim Hayes, Anchorage Library Foundation. So there's a couple things that have affected our board recently, some internal and some external, of course. One of the things I brought as a document is that memorandum of understanding that we have with the municipality and the Anchorage library system. It's not currently being fulfilled, is what I would say. In past years, we had a staff person who worked at the library who did the fundraising support that's indicated in the MOU. And we also had someone assisting on kind of generic admin, sending out letters, making sure our checks are going from the PO box to our bank account. In the last year or so, I think the role that has been filled is that admin support to a degree. We are having someone help us getting out our donor letters, making sure those checks are going into the bank. But the fundraising side, kind of the meat, is not happening. We're not having that. The downside of that is when you have someone who works in the library who can see both sides of this, you can leverage grants, right? You could leverage grants that are good for the library, or hey, this one's good for the foundation, and we can maximize our fundraising. That's not currently happening. So that's unfortunate. That's a big loss to us because we're all volunteers. We aren't professional fundraisers. And we do fundraising, but not to that level. You know, we don't write grants as a practice as volunteer board members. Additionally, we've had donors reach out because they read the news. It's not like they're going to the library and seeing anything. They're reading the news and they're concerned about what they're hearing about the library. So we'll get notes saying, I don't want to do my normal donation until, I feel better about the library. I, of course, do everything in my power to reach out to those individuals to explain your money is going to a private foundation. This is for capital projects. Like this is kind of a different animal. So we do a lot of that stewardship with our donors. And that's not normal. I normally don't get concerning letters in the mail from donors. So that's increased. Recently, just a couple of donors have reached out concerned about lack of staffing. One of them in the Chugach River branch. I can't remember. I think the other one was at Lusac, just saying that they didn't see a lot of people and were concerned, but not much more than that. The other thing, one of the big things that affected us is one of the projects that we're working on is the Alaska Room. We've got a large grant from NEH for that. We have bond money. We have individual bequests and things like that. We're trying to close that gap. One of the big private foundations that we were expecting to get funding from let us know that they were actually going to put a pin in it for another year because they were concerned about instability at the library. So that was hard to hear. We're still working with them to kind of prove the concept of this project that's been ongoing for years and years. There is a general lack of communication. I'll say, to speak to Christy's point about input on hiring of a director or closing hours, we're a nonprofit private board. There is no, code that says we have to be told about the stuff, but best practices around the country with boards like this is you keep them in the loop so they can communicate with donors. Sometimes you get to meet with the candidates for the library, but that's not always the case. For both the closure of the Sunday hours and the hiring of Mr. Hudson, we found out in a press release, just like the public. I immediately get phone calls from donors and I don't have any of the information. So it leaves me a little bit flat-footed. So just having a little bit more communication would be really helpful in our fundraising so that we can kind of appear as a united front on that. And I think that's, the only other thing, and you'll notice this in our strategic plan. Our strategic plan obviously has to be based off the strategic plan of the library. That's how we know what projects are priorities and how to fundraise. And we don't have anything from the public library. So it's a year old, and I don't think there is a new strategic plan, but it's probably highlighted in yellow in our strategic plan. We're waiting on that still. So we know what projects we normally fundraise for, but it would be helpful to have an updated public library plan so that we can have that as the basis for all of our conversations with donors. So that's lacking as well.
Thank you, Ms. Hayes. Ms. Rasmussen?
I did try to address several of these things in my original comments, but I think specifically the Friends of the Library works well with library staff. And one of the things that no longer exists because of library staff getting smaller is Live at the Library. And that was something Friends of the Library sponsored and was really a very popular summer activity. Also other events, outreach into the community, like banned books trivia, which, you know, sounds just like a fun thing, but it was a great chance to reach out into the community about the library and what's going on there. And we got to give our little spiel and we made some money, and it was a lot of fun. Also with programs, I feel like there are less programs. I do not know that as a fact that so I'm going to say that may be a problem. And like Kim, the fundraising is, it feels anecdotal, but people do call or they do send you an email and say, you know, when things are stabilized, I'll start giving again. And that's a bit of an issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rasmussen. Ms. Willard, did you want to comment about how board members are recruited and selected, and if you've seen any differences in that process or any changes?
Well, in some regard, that's the same black hole I've already described. Obviously, we don't recruit our own board members. The mayor's office does, but I will say that I found out by accident, basically, when the two new appointees were presented to the assembly at one of your last meetings. At that point, I had no idea that we had two vacancies. I knew certainly we had one because one of our really esteemed members had passed away the week before. So that was a rather sudden vacancy in our ranks. And then I believe the other one was to fill a vacancy due to another member's unexcused absences. But we didn't know about that. Nobody told us that it was open. And it was certainly a brief time from when those openings occurred to when the two new folks were appointed. I know of several people who've expressed interest to me, and I've told them, I've directed them to boards and commissions. There's a handy application. And that's where my knowledge stops. I mean, we're not consulted or know of any particular change in how that recruitment and vetting those applications happens.
Thank you. I'll go through the queue. I've got Mr. Rivera, Ms. Zalatel, and Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just first, I just want to thank you all for all of the hard work that you do for our wonderful library system. I can't imagine our library without all of the people who make it work day to day and who provide all of the supports. So thank you. So first thing, I just wanted to commiserate with your one of the comments I heard about communications and being caught flat-footed. That is certainly something that I can commiserate with a lot. And it's something that the more that we can better communicate as a municipality to our volunteer boards who are trying to do the work, the better. So on to my questions. You addressed this a little bit, but I would like to hear more specifics if you have them. I want to better understand sort of some of the normal interactions that you are used to having with the municipality and specifically with the library and what we have now. And I think you addressed them a bit, but in particular, for the Library Advisory Board, you had talked about you are a planning board. Do your interactions with the municipality now allow you to continue to be a planning board or not? And then the Library Foundation, you talked about working with library staff. Are you still able to work with library staff or not? And then my third is, do any of your boards have staffing from the municipality? And if yes, are you having staffing issues with your boards? Thanks.
Planning. So thank you, Mr. Rivera. It actually came up several meetings ago. We meet monthly. That are the visual aids I was waving around have a 21 date on it as an end date. And so it was brought up that it looks like it's time for strategic planning. And the deputy director said that the mayor was working on that. And that's all we've heard about it. So, again, I really don't know the answer to the question, but we haven't been asked to engage in a planning process to date.
Kim Hayes, Anchorage Library Foundation. And Mr. Rivera, what was the second part of your question? I remember can we still interact with staff, but what was the second part?
Yeah, so it was specifically for the Library Foundation was that staffing question. And then the third one for any of the boards who want to answer is, do you get staffing from the municipality to help out? And so have you historically gotten that? And do you still have that same level of support now?
All right. On the first question, one thing that hasn't changed is we always have representation from the library administration on our board meetings. So Deputy Director Elledge is on every meeting, and then usually another person. Before it was also Jacob Cole, and so kind of they were tag teaming it. We also have an admin assistant. I don't know if that's her actual title. Miss Allen also attends. So that hasn't changed. There are still people attending these meetings. I don't know where the breakdown is on this one. The only big change as it relates to staff interacting with us is normally we'd have staff members applying for our mini grants. And usually how they found out about the mini grants was from that the person described in our MOU, kind of the liaison between the two organizations, would let them know these are available and actually help them apply for those grants from us, since we don't have the time to coach them on that kind of stuff. I haven't seen that this year, and I don't know if it's they don't know the mini grants exist, if that communication about those mini grants isn't coming from those staff members. And the staffing question, we have staff as only as described in the MOU, meaning we are they're not our staff. We don't pay them, but they work at the library and assist us on clerical functions. Those are happening. The fundraising functions are not happening. So it's a share agreement there.
Thanks. And I guess before anyone else answers on the staffing for the board, just a quick clarifying. So just to make sure I have it right. So is it 0 mini grants have been applied for this year so far? Or
I would have to check to make sure, but I think in 2022, maybe there was some applied for in 2021 that we've approved, but I haven't seen any new applications come in. So I just worried that they're not being made aware of that opportunity.
Thanks. This is Mary Rasmussen from the Friends. I would like to say that we are all volunteers, and we do not have any staff that works directly with us. However, as part of our MOU, the volunteer coordinator works with us in a huge amount, because he works with the volunteers that work down where the books are stored and sorted and everything else. And that is continuing to go pretty well. The other thing is our liaison in recent times was Jacob Cole. And he was exceedingly helpful, because you could go to him and he knew the answers to your questions, so you could go ahead and do the things that you needed to do. And I am a little concerned that those answers will not be available anymore.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Mr. Rivera? Good. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here. My questions are specifically around the Library Advisory Board, and I really want to take some of the information I've heard and tie it back to what I'm reading in code. So the code under 4.60.040B, the board shall, and the first one there is act as a planning body in charge of all library activities, not limited to the operation of principal and branch libraries. So that raises the question for me, as a new library director is being sought. And has the Library Advisory Board been involved in any way on the director hire since the retirement of the prior library director, including any revisions to the job description or the vetting of candidates?
No.
Okay. I'm going to run through a few of these if that's okay, Madam Chair.
Sure.
Okay. Number 2, under that code section, the board shall make recommendations to the administration and assembly for the adoption of change, repeal, or alteration of rules, regulations, restrictions on library services. Within that regard, was there any involvement by the Library Advisory Board or consultation prior to closing the LUSAC library on Sundays?
I would say no, but I will also say there was some discussion months ago about kind of generalities about if the budget takes some kind of turn, restriction of hours may have to happen. That was months ago. The deputy director told us that. Since then, we've heard nothing about that. And certainly before the more recent closure, we heard about it in a press release.
Okay, thank you. And were you asked about were you informed of any budget turn, as you put it, that happened that would prompt a significant change in library services?
No.
Okay. And then Mr. Constant addressed the bag policy previously, but were you consulted prior to the institution of a single bag policy at the library?
I just heard about it.
Okay. And then finally, has the Library Advisory Board been involved in any changes to policies or operations around the collection, the acquisition, or or getting rid of pieces of the collection at the library?
I'm thinking. I can say we've made no recommendation about the collection. There have been discussions at the table about various difficulties with the collection in terms of access, COVID, that kind of thing, around kind of general issues with that department doing what it should be doing. But other than that, I can't recall any particular presentation.
Thank you. And then my final question is, in that context of making recommendations regarding the rules, regulations, restrictions on library services and all matters related to the library, are there any areas in which the Library Advisory Board hasn't been consulted recently that we haven't talked about that it traditionally has been consulted prior to making any of those types of changes?
It's hard to make a comparison like that, but I feel like I'm whining now along the same track. But generally, we're sort of told what's happening and may have a discussion, but we're really not asked to have input or any kind of advisory role in policy, certainly not in policy. In practice, I think in practice, the conversations have mostly been happening lately around staffing and the issues of trying to run these branch offices in LUSAC with less staff and moving people around and so on like that. But I really can't come up with any other examples.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as my colleague said, thank you for being here and thank you for the work that you're doing. I actually want to begin with Mr. Falsey and ask, I'm trying to understand the authority and sort of legally where that lies between the administration, the library advisory board, and maybe you can help it as Ms. Zalatel was walking through some of the language and the roles that the library advisory board plays. Can you help us to understand, beyond what has been done traditionally, what is that role, and are there requirements for the administration in making decisions that require them to involve this board?
Well, through the chair to Member Perez-Verdia, I think the best answer I can give you is to start with language of the charter, which does vest the legislative power in the assembly and the executive and administrative power in the mayor's office. So to first order, all of the executive and administrative functions are vested in the executive branch. The Library Advisory Board has been established by the Assembly pursuant to its legislative functions in an advisory capacity to the executive branch. And then the text of the ordinance that you have before you, AMC 46040, I think does a good job of laying out what the Library Advisory Board has been charged with doing. You'll see there that the board can also be charged with additional functions, as the Assembly may refer to it from time to time. And that is not a totally uncommon arrangement in the municipality. We have a number of boards which are advisory and really designed to support the functions of the municipality.
So the language that was shared earlier is purely intended as advisory and does not necessarily bind the administration to fulfill that in order to conduct their business.
Through the chair to Member Presverdia, I'd like to get a chance to look into this a bit further, but my sense is that the general rule is that all of the boards in AMC 460 are advisory to the executive branch.
Okay, thank you. And just a couple more. I'm curious about the Youth Advisory Commission and their role as it relates to your three organizations. And my understanding is that a recent project that they took on directly related to the library. And I wonder if you could discuss that commission's relationship to your board and your organizations, and the recent project that I understand they took on. Can you share that with us in terms of the relationship and any work that is being done with the library through that commission?
Thank you, Mr. Perez. There's no direct relationship. However, there is a crossover relationship. Our teen advisor, our teen liaison member is, I believe, a member of the Youth Advisory Commission, which is sitting in the mayor's office, I believe. So we don't have a direct consultative or partnership relationship with that group, but there is a common member in those groups. And I believe some of the work of the Youth Advisory Commission has come over to our board through that member, through that liaison.
And was there a recent project that group took on and they presented at your board?
No, they did not. When our teen liaison presented around issues that she took up to examine the placement of LGBTQ books and a variety of other kind of situational placement of various volumes that she found inappropriate. At that point, I didn't even know that she was a member of this other group, or in fact that other group existed. She asked for permission to make that presentation at our table as our liaison, and she was given that permission. So it wasn't as far as I knew a result of her activities in the other group. I just thought it was a result of her concern for what she felt was problems with the distribution in our library.
I see. Thank you for that clarification. I'll probably have another question down the road, but I want to cede my time to others. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdia. I have two others in the queue, and I just want to be mindful of time because we have a number of other guests here today. So we'll go to Ms. Allard and then Ms. Price.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For me, this is clearly an orchestrated political attack directed at a municipal employee. I believe this is inappropriate and likely a violation of law. I will no longer participate in this witch hunt, and I will be leaving this meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Ms. Price?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair to Member Presvidia. Just to kind of clarify your question, I know that was a really big problem in the community, and just as she just outlined, it was one of our members does overlap with the LAB. And so it is a youth issue, she thought. So she brought it forward to the commission. And so we discussed the topic. We asked her questions on it. But in the end, there's no ongoing project. There's no ongoing effort whatsoever because we were uncomfortable addressing the issue without more information. So we asked her to bring us more information on the sexually explicit information she said was in the library. But as far as I know, that's kind of her own personal endeavor as the liaison, the teen liaison, but the commission by no means is dealing with that issue at all, and I don't think it will be in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Price. Mr. Constant?
Ms. Lloyd, do you know who the youth member is that we're talking about?
Yes, it's Denali Tsubaka.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. I actually have a question for council or Mr. Falsey. That code provision about library advisory boards, number 3 says perform other powers and duties as the assembly may refer from time to time. Is there a specific mechanism that's required to make a referral from the assembly to an advisory board?
Through the chair to Assembly Member Zalatel, I wouldn't think so. I would say only that the body would be constrained to act in such a way that it is acting as a body. So you would likely have to adopt something. Now, whether it's an ordinance, resolution, a memorandum, I don't think the law requires you to pick one form over the other.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Thank you, Mr. Falsey. So I don't want to cut anyone off because this is a really important discussion, but being mindful of time, I think we'll go ahead and move on to the next portion. Mr. Constant, are you
Quick bridge.
putting yourself in the queue? I have some comments, but go ahead.
Oh, on the last topic or the next topic? Because I just want to clarify something.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So at the beginning of this meeting, I made a statement about who was where, and I was informed that Ms. Domboski was in fact at that time back in the building from her tour at the library with Must Read Alaska and had other priorities to attend.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. And thank you all for being here today and for your tremendous service to our library. The next portion of the work session was intended to focus on hiring and staffing, service levels, and policies and procedures. And as Mr. Constant noted, we had invited the municipality's Human Resources Director, Nikki Chewbacca, Library Acting Director Judy Elledge, and Municipal Manager Amy Domboski to speak to these issues, but they were unable to attend in person. They requested that I forward questions via email, and they will make it a priority to respond. Further, Ms. Domboski has offered to meet with individual assembly members if there are other questions. I have asked Ms. Domboski for a more convenient time where we might schedule another work session and have that discussion with members of the administration. So there is a copy here, as I noted in the beginning, of those questions. I won't read through them all in the interest of time, but I do want to ask members if they have any questions that they want to add to the list. And you don't need to answer now, but you can. Mr. Cross and then Mr. Rivera.
Thank you. Yeah, I read through the list of questions. Just some other questions I have, and we can see that as on the handouts here, there's a significant number of openings, minimal being filled. There's an overall labor shortage across the board in all industries. I don't care if you're mowing lawns or you're trying to fill an executive banking position. Across the board, there's a significant labor shortage. Additionally, the library, from recent events as well as just attending there, does have some, although we have great security out there, there still at times is a feeling of a lack of safety just because of the exterior element around the library. And I'm curious if either of those two things and how much those create a challenge in filling positions. Just a feeling of safety walking to and from work, and as well as just a general lack of labor, and whether or not and I know that we did increase some positions as far as pay, but inflation is outpacing our pay scale. I know that I have a friend who owns a landscaping company, and he's offering people $30 an hour to mow lawns. That's startling. So But just take those things into consideration. How much of those external factors are non-political as far as filling vacancies? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. So just to be clear, you would like that added to the list of questions, how external factors such as the labor shortage and inflation are impacting hiring?
And the exterior safety the Eagle River Library and the other ones that I've been to are fantastic. I use the Eagle River Library frequently with my children. But we do the assembly meetings here in the LUSAC, and it's a different environment. And particularly in light of the violent assault that we've seen out there. And there's other concerns. That's definitely bad press for trying to fill vacancies at the library when there's a feeling of a lack of safety. Is that concerns amongst the individuals that are applying for the job? Since we don't know how many have applied or how those interviews have gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Sort of two lines of questions. They may have some overlap with the list of questions that were already sent to the administration. So first is regarding the Sunday hours, and sort of want to put it on the record that this isn't the first time that an administration has tried to cut Sunday hours. In fact, it was not that long ago that a friendly administration tried to cut Sunday hours, and I said hell no to them, and I will say hell no to this administration. So first is I want to understand why this administration decided to cut Sunday hours. I read their press release and I was not convinced. Then I want to understand, is it due to staffing levels or other considerations? And then I want to understand the cost to reverse this decision, if there is a cost to it, or if this is just simply a policy choice. So I want to better understand those nuances regarding the Sunday hours. Second is policies. Some of the policy changes that have been made. I want to get a better understanding of the rationale for those policy changes. On face value, it looks like those policy changes are targeting a population in our community, people experiencing homelessness. And if that is the case, then I think it would, as one of our members likes to say, is likely a violation of the law. So I really want to understand the administration's perspective on that, and would rather us not get sued for violating the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Will you be sending those questions or sharing them perhaps with Ms.? Okay, you got them all. Thank you, Ms. Ross. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. I think that I would like to understand the impact of the hiring freeze that was implemented at the library on these staffing levels, because we know that policy was instituted by the administration. And also at the last Library Advisory Board, it's on the record that the library director, the deputy or whatever her title is, was spending lots of time interviewing people. So it isn't for a lack of interested applicants. It's something else.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. And if members, go ahead, Mr. Rivera, Perez-Verdia.
Yes, I just want to. I'll send this to you. But there's a number of references based on best practice around libraries nationally and internationally that discusses specifically access. And there's some really good information here about. In the past, the efforts to restrict access were often based on quote unquote security concerns and also budget concerns, and that restricting access specifically on weekends are past practices that were identified to restrict certain populations of individuals. And so I'll forward this on, but I think it's really clear based on a lot of this best practice that was identified in the past and is advised by libraries to ensure that there is access and they're open and they're inclusive and that they play an important role in the community. So I just I'll forward this. I have two references I'll send to you.
Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdia. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for preparing these questions and for the additional questions. I would like have a conversation about how we can utilize the library advisory board in getting some of this information and then making recommendations based on the information learned. It seems to be their role, and it seems to be something that the assembly can ask them to do. As we know, we all have a lot on our plates. In addition, the library advisory board are individuals who are deeply involved with the library and its operations, or have been historically. And so I think their perspective would be very valuable as we move through this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. So if members have any other questions, you can go ahead and send those to Ms. Ross, who will compile them, and we will share them with the administration. Thank you. We have two more areas to look at. The first is workplace environment, and then the final one is employee feedback. With the workplace environment, we have Daryl Hess, the MOA Ombudsman. And if you would come up, Mr. Hess. And again, I want to just call attention to the time. It's 2:01, and our work session that was scheduled for after this one has been canceled. So there is some time if people can stay around to extend this work session, or an opportunity to extend it. Thank you, Mr. Hess, for being here. I know that some issues of employee concerns have reached your office, and I'm hoping you can talk about perhaps the process for addressing those and the status of current investigations. I have a few questions to start off the discussion. Have you fielded any workplace complaints from library employees? If so, what is the nature of those complaints, and how were the complaints handled?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I have fielded complaints from library staff regarding work environment at the Lusac Library. I was contacted by an employee on March 16th. I met with them on March 17th. Another employee accompanied them to the meeting in the ombudsman's office. They alleged a hostile work environment and harassment due to actions of the deputy director. Normally our normal process is we allow the departments an opportunity to address the public's concerns. So in this instance, if it's an employee comes to us and they haven't exhausted their administrative remedies, we would refer them to the Human Resources Department to conduct an investigation. These employees were extremely adamant they did not want to go through HR. They stated, they were very clear to me, they stated they did not trust HR, that the current director is very politically vocal and active, and they were concerned that HR staff would feel pressured regarding any investigation. So they were very adamant. I can't force somebody to seek an administrative remedy that they're not comfortable pursuing. After discussing the situation with them, I explained to them the ombudsman's office, we could conduct an investigation. I could offer an opinion and make a recommendation, which the administration, the department could accept or reject. And given the very strong and vocal public defense of the deputy director by the administration, honestly, I did not feel that a recommendation from me would go anywhere. So, and given the seriousness of the allegations by the staff, I believe that the best avenue for them was to file with an enforcement agency. So the Anchorage Equal Rights Commission and the State Commission on Human Rights both have work share agreements with the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So EEOC investigations in Alaska regarding workplace complaints are investigated by the AERC, are the state commission. So I referred these individuals to both to the Equal Rights Commission to file, and I consulted with Heather McAlpine, who was the director of the Office of Equal Opportunity at the time. We sat down, we discussed the situation. We both had been getting calls and emails from library employees, and we decided that I would also refer any library employees who came to my office. Besides referring them to the AERC, I would refer them to Heather. One of the roles of OEO is to try to informally resolve these types of employee complaints before they go to an enforcement agency. So I felt it would benefit the employees to explore their options through OEO and through the AERC. And I believe Ms. McAlpine had scheduled a meeting with HR to discuss these concerns, and the meeting was scheduled for, I think, about an hour after she was terminated. So the meeting with HR did not take place as far as I know.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. Are you aware of any investigations being conducted on complaints of discrimination against employees or any other issues?
So I am not aware of any I'm not sure what happened to any inquiries being done by OEO after Ms. McAlpine was dismissed. And of course, the Equal Rights Commission would not be able to tell me if they have any open investigations concerning municipal employees. I also wanted to note that on Thursday, May 5th, the Deputy Ombudsman and I went to the Luzak Library to present an award to an employee. Ms. McAlpine met us there, and after we presented the award, 6 to 8 employees approached us and expressed similar workplace concerns, and they were all referred to the AERC and to Ms. McAlpine.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. A final question, and then we will go through the queue. Have you fielded any complaints from the public on library policies or other issues? If so, what's the nature of those complaints and how were they handled?
No, not recently. In the last 10 years, we've probably fielded quite a few complaints involving the library, but nothing recently.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. So I have Mr. Constant and Mr. Rivera in the queue.
A couple of questions. Thank you. Do you know who the current AERC director is?
There is Marie Husa is the acting director.
Right. Okay. So there's an acting person while we wait. Do you know what the appointment process is for the AERC?
So the commission, it's the executive director of the Equal Rights Commission is a very unique position, serves at the pleasure of the commission. So the commission voted to have the chair and vice chair be part of the interview panel to interview candidates. And I believe there's a special meeting scheduled later this month to discuss the applicants. But the commission will vote on the candidate that they want to hire, and then that goes to the mayor to sign off on.
Well, that's an interesting part. So the mayor has a veto?
I'm not aware of any mayor ever not approving a candidate selected by the commission. It is an interesting process because the Equal Rights Commission, even though it's part of the municipality, is considered to be an outside enforcement agency. Mm-hmm. But the mayor essentially, in a way, does have veto power, even though the executive director serves at the pleasure of the commission.
Is that established in code?
Yes.
So that's definitely an area of the code we should look at. Second question, clearly OEO is subject to the influence of the executive. At this point, there's a record of that now, whether it's cause and effect or just by sheer dumb luck timing, that there were a number of investigations going on and then she was fired. So you suggested that you were asked to investigate, but your fear was that because of the nature of conditions as they are today, your record would be ignored or rejected. So if that's a fair characterization.
Well, I think given that the administration has been very vocal, very public about their very strong defense of Ms. Elledge, that I thought it would not be beneficial to the employees for me to offer an opinion and make a recommendation that I didn't think any action would be taken on. I think an enforcement agency has a lot more power. They can enforce their order. They can go to court and seek a court order to enforce their orders.
So if you did an investigation, you had a set of records that were established into a report, the report was decided to be rejected by the executive, would that report be subject to discovery and allowed to be used in a finding of fact?
So our reports are public records.
So I would offer that in the future, it might be worthy to contemplate a parallel track to create the records. If you have people essentially begging you for help, find a way to make that report, because the report might have more value beyond what an executive might choose to do with it. Just something to contemplate. And I understand you do the calculus, and if there is an enforcement agency, it's probably better to have it with somebody with teeth. And so I appreciate that. I just wonder if there might be a softer side of that we could also engage. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Thank you, Mr. Hess. Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So a few questions. Some of them are going to be for you, Mr. Hess, some for council. So first is, so as I understand it, the AERC is going through their process. What are some of the ramifications if the MOA is found to be in fault after AERC goes through their process? Like, what do you think they might recommend?
There could be legal sanctions, there could be legal consequences, there could be financial consequences. There have been Equal Rights Commission cases where settlements have been in the tens of thousands of dollars. I think the most expensive one was $250,000 a settlement. But in 10 years as ombudsman, we deal with an average of 1,500 people a year. So in 10 years, it's 15,000 people. I've dealt with a lot of employees, a lot of members of the public. I have never experienced, and I use the word allegation when I talk about this, because they're allegations till they're proven. But in 10 years and dealing with 15,000 people, I have never seen so many municipal employees in one facility of one department come forward with similar complaints. So I know I've talked to 8 or 10, and there were several that I believe contacted Ms. McAlpine. So you're talking 12 to 18 employees. That's quite a few employees.
That is. So would any of the ramifications be some type of review of policy at the library? Is that something AERC would do?
It could be part of there could be a settlement agreement potentially, and part of the settlement agreement could be, posting certain policies, doing certain training, changing certain procedures. So those things are often part of settlement agreements.
Okay, thank you. My next question is for council. So I should know this, but are library employees, are they part of a union?
I think I might refer that question to simply, why don't you know your title anymore, Claire? Claire would have the best answer for you on that.
Claire Ross, Assembly Legislative Liaison, former library staff. They are represented by AMEA.
Okay. Well, hopefully they are taking full advantage of that avenue as well. Okay, so then I want to better understand, even though it may be obvious, I think it's important to put on the record. So why are people so afraid to go to HR? Like, what do they think is going to happen to their employment, their work environment if they go to HR?
This is, based on what people said to me. It's not my perspective, but it's just expressing what they expressed to me. Is they express concerns that HR staff may not have been comfortable or may have been concerned about conducting a fair investigation because they would be fearful for their jobs. I think it's the reality of the current position, the current situation, the current state of mind for many municipal employees, right or wrong. That's how many employees feel. I've talked to employees that are concerned about doing their job because they're afraid if how they do their job doesn't comport with political expectations, they're concerned about their job.
Thank you. It's unfortunate that Mr. Shabaka isn't here because I think this is a line of questioning that would be appropriate for him because it's, we have HR there for a reason. And if municipal employees don't feel comfortable going to HR, then I think that's something serious that we need to resolve.
Well, a recent issue was, I know one employee contacted me and I think may have contacted some assembly members regarding a recent hiring process at the library, and the hiring panel included the HR director. And there's nothing in the code or the personnel rules that I'm aware of that says the HR director can't be part of a hiring panel. But if a member of the public or a current employee who applied for a position believes there was something wrong with the hiring process, they're supposed to go to HR to file a complaint. And they were going, I don't want to go to HR to complain about this. The HR director is part of the hiring panel. So I think sometimes it's the optics, even though nothing's done wrong or nothing's done illegal, we have to think about how it looks when we do things sometimes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Thank you, Mr. Hess, for being here. One of your comments, and I understand that the scope of this has to do with the library, but I got the impression from one of your comments that the feedback you've been getting about work conditions have been not only in the library department but in others, and so I guess I wanted to just explore that for a moment. And ask if that is true, if you have received complaints from employees outside of the library about work conditions as you described them just recently, in that they feel as though if their actions do not align with a particular political position, that they're at risk of losing their job. Is that something you've heard from employees beyond the ones we're speaking about today?
Yes, but not through complaints filed with my office. So I've been with the Muni for 14 years. I've been ombudsman for 10 years. I've been pretty active in the community for decades. I have a lot of friends who work at the Muni and in multiple departments. And frankly, they stop by my office just to talk, just to decompress. And I would say the morale among municipal employees is pretty low right now. And I think it's affecting people's ability to do their jobs, and it's affecting the turnover at the Muni and the number of retirements, the number of people who are leaving. It just doesn't seem to be a happy work environment these days.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdia. Any other questions for Mr. Hess? Thank you, Mr. Hess. Appreciate you being here. The final section involves former employees who are available to answer specific questions from assembly members. Did you put yourself in the queue? Okay. And we have Jacob Cole, former Assistant Director, Public Services, on the phone. We also have Stacia McGurty, former Adult Services Coordinator, here. And if you want to come up at the table, you are invited to take a seat. And also Mary Jo Torgeson, the former Director of the library. So I have a few questions listed here. And we'll start, if you want to come up over here. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. It's been brought to my attention that members of the staff are wanting us to be very careful not to follow lines of inquiry that might be construed as defaming another staff member of the municipality. If questions move towards a line, hopefully we'll get a little note from our friend at the end of the table, our acting counsel, and what we can do is plan for instead an executive session in which these conversations can be had in a full and free-flowing manner. So I would like the speakers to be as earnest and true as possible and careful.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. I had a note to mention that as with some of the other meetings we have where we interview appointees, there's always an option to schedule, as Mr. Constant said, an executive session if there is anything pertaining to character or that could damage someone's reputation. So thank you, Mr. Constant. We also have Linda Klein, former youth librarian, on the line. Welcome. Thank you for being here today. We'll start with a question for Mr. Cole. During your time at the library, what was the standard process for developing and approving new policies and procedures?
Well, basically, what we would do is we were trying to keep a tracking sheet of all of our policies and procedures and when they were last updated. Most policies we were trying to update in a 2 to 3 year process. We would look at it, we would reach out to the departments and the employees that were involved. We would sometimes even liaison with outside organizations so that we got the perspectives of patrons that might be affected by policies. And then we would take that policy and we would bring it to the Library Advisory Board where they would make suggestions or edits or ask questions, that sort of thing. Many times, due to the questions of the Library Advisory Board, we would go back and we would make changes to the policy and we would bring it back to the next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Thank you, Mr. Cole. And so a question for either Mr. Cole or Ms. Torgerson. Prior to this new leadership, how were interview committees for job openings determined? What did the selection process look like?
Madam Chair,
Oh,
may I just
Pressfidia?
ask Mr. Cole to introduce himself and share? I know you did in your opening, but his former role and how long he was there, and it'd be helpful when each
We can do that.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and start with Mr. Cole. If you would go ahead and introduce yourself and talk about your role at the library. And I do want to note, we have about 6 minutes left, but as a work session, we can just continue to hold the session if no one objects here. And so we'll go ahead and have folks talk a little bit about their role, their former role at the library. Mr. Cole?
Yes, I have been a librarian for 20 years. I started with the municipality of Anchorage's library back in March of 2017 when I was technology coordinator and in charge of patron services. I then received a promotion in May of 2019 and became the assistant director of public services. In May of 2020, I was the interim library director after the retirement of Mary Jo Torgerson until Sammy Graham started in July. That's 21. Sorry, 2021, not 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Cole.
Hi, I'm Stacia McGordy. I was the Adult Services Coordinator. I have been with Anchorage Public Library since May of 2013 until just this June 1st. I was first hired as a reference and programming librarian, and then I don't remember when Rayette Sterling, who was the former Adult Services Coordinator, left anymore. But after she left, I was promoted to the Adult Services Coordinator. In that position, I had a staff of about 15 full and part-time employees who mainly we were in charge of reference and programming for adults in Anchorage, as well as coordinating services with branches when possible.
Thank you.
I'm Mary Jo Torgerson. I was the library director for 9 years. I retired April of 2021.
Thank you. And Ms. Klein on the phone?
Yes. My name is Linda Klein. I began working at the Anchorage Public Library in 2006. I've worked in various capacities with increasing responsibility. I began as a youth services librarian. I've served as a branch manager, information literacy librarian, and most recently, a librarian, supervising librarian at LUSAC Library and Youth Services, basically second in command to the youth services coordinator.
Thank you, Ms. Klein. And if members prefer, we can start with member questions if folks have questions they want to ask. Ms. Zelatel?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. To the extent that our former library colleagues are comfortable indicating why they left their position at the library, I would like to know.
Would you like to
I'm
start?
sorry, can you repeat that?
Why did you leave your employment at the library if you're comfortable with sharing?
Okay, thank you. I applied for the library director position during the office of interim mayor Austin Quinn Davis. And I guess it was the concern at the time that they wanted to wait for the incoming mayor to make a choice of the library director position. When the Bronson administration took office, I was not contacted about that, but helped in the best way that I possibly could, Sammy Graham and Judy Elledge. And then I applied when the position came up again, and I never heard anything back until the hiring of Mr. Hudson, who is their current choice for library director. I instead applied for and received a job in Longview, Washington as a library director. It was also my feeling that there was a deterioration of staff morale. There were continuing fights among the library senior leadership about the direction of the library and some other issues. And so it also was a part of the impetus to look for a new position.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Would anyone else like to address the question? Go ahead, Ms. McGorty.
Honestly, it was a lack of accountability towards political appointees was really kind of my driving force. There were some questionable decisions and unethical decisions being made that I didn't agree with. I tried to work as best I could, but when the opportunity for a new job came, I took it.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to respond?
Yes, this is Linda Klein. And I won't get into too many specifics, but a lot of the things that you've already discussed today in terms of, for example, the complaints that were being fielded by Daryl Hess's office. And I was aware of all of these issues that were coming up. I was hearing a lot of very disturbing things from employees. I was concerned with the direction that programming and our collection development was going. And I also felt that at that point, I just really couldn't tolerate it anymore. Physically, mentally, I was done.
Thank you. And I believe Ms. Zelatel has a follow-up question.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Could you expound on your concerns around collection development?
There were some things that were starting to happen that were disturbing to me. First of all, you may or may not, as an example, there were 6 books that were identified by the Seuss Foundation that they were indicated they were no longer going to publish because of racist imagery. And there were a group of us librarians who got together and discussed the issue. And we made the determination that those books did not serve our community, and we decided to remove them from the collection. Ms. Elledge instructed us to return those books to the collection, and we did so because that was what our director told us to do. That to me was an indication of certain priorities in terms of the way that the children's collection was being viewed. And that was probably, to me, the first flag. That's the one I will comment on.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. I have Mr. Constant and Mr. Rivera next.
Thank you. Now I have another question. Can you speak a little bit as well about the nature of how you think the children's collection was suddenly being viewed, and what is the normal process for decisions about what books come in or leave the collection? That's one question. And then a question back to you is, you mentioned concerns about ethical decision making. And my question for you would be, separate from the first, is did you document those concerns in any way? I don't need you to get into the specifics at this point.
Who do you want to answer first?
Why don't you go ahead, Ms. McGurty?
I spoke to Judy personally about those because I had consulted with HR, and Aiden Garcia, our HR rep, said that, well, have you done this? And I was like, admittedly, I have not. So I took his advice and had a direct conversation. It didn't change anything. I didn't expect that it would. Other things happened. I did send a letter to Aiden and HR documenting my complaints. The reply I received said that they would take more thought, but I never got a response beyond that. So I did let HR know what my complaints were.
This is Mr. Cole. I spoke with Aiden Garcia about some staff concerns. I sent him some messages and Teams. He said that he would talk to the deputy director about them. Then right before the last day of my employment, I spoke with another HR specialist, Amanda Mount, and I was extremely candid with her about numerous things that had occurred that employees had complained about and that I had witnessed myself.
Mr. Cole, did you document
And
that?
I also spoke with Amy Dembowski the first week of March about our concerns.
Was there any record created relating to that?
Just emails and Teams messages.
Emails and Teams messages. Okay, and then sorry to be roundabout, but back to the first question. Answer the first question last. What way did you perceive the change in the way the collections for children were being run? And what's the normal process for introducing or removing books?
Usually, I'll speak a little bit. I know Linda can also do this, but generally when we select items, we use a subject specialist who knows that. Linda Klein, who is our youth services supervisor, has been on American Library Association committee for the Caldecott Award. She's had a very long and illustrious career picking materials, and her expertise is usually the one that we go by. When there's a question of that, the youth services librarians as a whole discuss the matter with the manager, which is Elizabeth Nicolai, and myself, because I am in charge of all public services, including youth services. I found out after the fact that the deputy director wanted to reinstate the Seuss books that we had removed from the collection. She also asked us about any other books that we may have removed from the collection in the preceding year due to any, thing that we found objectionable. Usually when there's a challenge, the way that works is a person fills out a form. It goes to the collection manager. The collection manager assigns 1 to 2 librarians to look over the objection and then discuss it. And then they make a recommendation to the collection manager what should be done with that item. After that, the collection manager then writes a letter to the person who is objecting to the material and informs them that if they are still unhappy with the decision, they can appeal that decision to the library director. And then the library director is supposed to respond to them in writing within 30 days. If they still disagree with the decision, they can appeal it to the library advisory board 30 days after that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you. So 3 questions. First one goes to the last thing that Mr. Cole stated. So if an appeal goes to the library advisory board, what powers does the library advisory board have at that point?
They generally make they make an advisement to the library director and to the patrons about whether or not the items should be kept in the collection or not. That's never happened in the 5.5 years that I was with the library, though.
Okay, so they make an advisory determination which the library director can ignore or not.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So then my 2 original questions. So Ms. Klein, are you able to share the list of books which, after going through the process, were found to have racist imagery, and then you were directed to put them back into collection?
I believe I can identify if I remember correctly, the 6 Seuss titles. Are those the ones you're referring to?
Correct.
Let's see. I'm drawing a blank. They're not particularly well-known Seuss books. Let me pull up the list for you.
And if you don't have it now, that's fine. If you could send it to the body, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, and actually I have the list.
Okay, great.
The one is, and to think I saw it on Mulberry Street, If I Ran the Zoo, McElligot's Pool, On Beyond Zebra, Scrambled Egg Super, and The Cat's Quizzer. And these were all books that we did have in our collection in various locations and various quantities.
Thank you. And then my other question goes to Mr. Cole. So you had described in your earlier comments about quote unquote fights among the library senior leadership. Could you just describe a little bit about what some of those detailed?
Yeah, so, one of the things that was discussed by Mrs. Rasmussen was the 2-bag policy. This was not something that was written up. This isn't something that was discussed amongst the senior managers. It wasn't anything that was gone through the process. So when we asked the deputy director why how this came to be, why she decided to do this, she told us that she hadn't said anything about there being a policy and that it was all just a misunderstanding, even though multiple staff asked the head of security, who instituted this policy, and he said that it was the deputy director. There were also some other times where she would talk about, either hiring plans or other things, and we would disagree with her, choices, and she would either, shout us down or she would cut us off. And so we just didn't feel like we were a part of the decision-making process anymore. I can say for myself, there were aspects of my job that I had done since the very beginning that were taken away from me. My ability to do things like communicate to all staff, without having to have it run through another person had changed. I had been reprimanded for communicating things to staff that they needed to know because the deputy director wanted to control information and only wanted to be the one that could give information to staff. So all of these things made it so that a lot of the senior staff would meet separately apart from our official library leadership team meeting because we had actual work that we needed to discuss, and we were getting, shut down or told, that it wasn't important and to move on to something else. So we decided to meet separately.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. So I have a few questions for Ms. Torgerson as our former library director. Was wondering if you would talk a bit about how interview committees for job openings were determined and what the selection process looked like. And then also just if you could speak to what does a well-managed library look like, or what is involved in those functions as director?
Okay, thanks. So we hired really good managers, and they had the credentials to make their own decisions, it was a collegial leadership team. So they had the ability to, write the posting, interview whoever they wanted. I usually did not sit in on those unless it was a manager, unless I was part of that process. Though sometimes I did. I could no more interview every single staff person that was hired just because of the sheer volume, and there were other things to do. And I trusted my managers to pick the best people possible. So from a selection side, we also have, through human resources, there are classifications to follow. There are job descriptions to follow, and HR hammered in our heads for many years how those had to be followed and would not let us really deviate. So the selection process, again, the senior staff decided on the staff they hired. I might or might not meet them. Very seldom would I say, I don't know about that, just because I trusted the folks. So then the second part might be a little longer from an angle of well-managed library. The library director represents the staff, represents the staff, represents the library to the community. So there's multiple arms. So first off, with staff, if you ill-treat the staff, the morale will be bad. There are policies set in place, and those policies, we gathered information from staff to develop those policies and to then take the policies to our library advisory board to be discussed, and sometimes they would tweak. It wasn't ever a rubber stamp. And so those policies would be or would not be adopted by our library board. There was kind of a flow with that. So, again, we developed a strong esprit de corps with our staff so that their voices were heard. It didn't mean that likewise, as a library director, you oftentimes have to make the decision that you've been hired to do, which could go against staff, but their input was really important. A well-managed library, you're also conscious of the budget. And I did write all of the assembly members about a concern of a recent hiring. It was an acting position. But let me just say one more caveat. The last thing I thought I would ever do is sit in front of you to complain about the library or to complain about a previous director, because that's just not done. You get out of the way. But things are so egregious to me right now. That's why I am here, and that's why I have such strong feelings. So from an angle of the budget and the collection development department, that's $1 million budget, and that budget comes both from city funds as well as from our foundation and the Friends of the Library. That's a lot of money. So it's important that someone know the process. They know how to work with vendors. They know purchasing rules. They know what it means to buy, and you buy a balanced collection. You try to present many sides. You and it conservative as well as progressive. It really, that's what a library is about. And so that is, one of my concerns was that someone was put into a position who had never done that. They're in an acting position, yes, but when there were qualified people that could have been put into that position. And we're talking about $1 million. So from a fiduciary standpoint, that's one of the major roles for a library director. So then there's short and long-term goals. So I don't expect the present assistant library director to necessarily look long-term. However, that is something that you should be doing all the time. The short-term goals, you have a blueprint through a strategic plan, and that strategic plan, if you're going to redo it, you really do need community input because it's the community who owns the library. You need their viewpoint. So from a short-term side, you've got the strategic plan to go by, and then long-term, somebody right now should be thinking about, what is our next strategic plan? It doesn't come from an administration down, though certainly the priorities of the mayor and the assembly are certainly something that should help guide what the library's goals are. And then from an angle of staffing and hiring, I mentioned that getting the right people and MLS, that's really important. Budget time, you're conscious of preparing the budget and communication because you have these three boards that you need to train, nurture, and make sure that they have the information they need to do their jobs as a volunteer.
Thank you, Ms. Torgerson. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Ms. Torgerson, you said something interesting. That's the community's library. So when you were the library director, how did you handle opposing viewpoints within the community, in the management of the community's library?
I think of two instances. One that was very controversial was moving the Alaska collection. And that was highly unpopular. We had a flood in that portion of the library. Materials were damaged. And so that happened. We had to move that collection. So it also happened that we had a long-range plan that suggested that be done in some future time. So we did move that collection, and then we pulled together historical commission, all the historians in the community, and had a meeting, kind of a mini charrette, explaining why we did. It wasn't a popular decision, and that's what I mean. You do make unpopular decisions, and you stick by them, taking input at the same time from the community. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Can I ask, so a follow-up to that is, to what extent for the viewpoints that you received as the library director during your tenure, were those viewpoints ever expressed by the mayor as to what should or shouldn't the library should or shouldn't be doing, or what should or shouldn't be in the collection?
In my 9 years, that was never done. And I worked under Mayor Sullivan and Mayor Burkowski. Or Berkowitz.
Yeah.
Whatever. It was a B.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Do any other members want in the queue? I do have one more question for Ms. Torgerson. Would you speak to how the library approached issues of equity and diversity during your time?
Who owns the library? Everybody owns the library. And whether you're pay taxes or not, it's a community facility. And, you know, we really stressed diversity, equity, and inclusion because there are many communities that oftentimes have been ignored in the past. And we did a lot of outreach to the Alaska Native community, particularly with the Alaska Room, but really for the strategic plan. And the strategic plan was key. We went out to and did outreach, and our staff did this plan. We didn't hire consultants. Went out to the community asking specific questions to the Polynesian community, to the Alaska Native community, the seniors, those groups that we felt might have been underserved and whose voices we didn't usually hear. And so we incorporated that information into our strategic plan, and it also became then focal. So the homeless community, or people that are homeless, for example, play a large part. Folks that don't have really anything but the clothes on their back or not much more don't have computers. So it's important for people in villages who don't have homes in Anchorage have access to the technology. Now, we also had a code of conduct, and that code of conduct did restrict if you smell too much, if you're inebriated, you know, and then we would ask them to leave. But people that are homeless, 2 bags, I think, mothers carry 3 bags or fathers carry 3 bags of their children. How do you discriminate, or how do you determine that? To me, it is asking for a lawsuit to happen someday.
Thank you, Ms. Torgerson. Do members have any other questions? Okay, then I believe we are at the end of this work session. I'm sorry, that's right. Mr. Constant was in the queue. Go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. It's kind of a question for all of the former staff. We've been through many convolutions of an appointment is made, an appointee is rejected for lack of qualifications, and then an alternative process is implemented by the mayor and his team to foist his intended person to continue serving in that role. So I have a functional question, not a title question, and it's a simple one, I think. Who is the director of the library right now?
Judy Elledge.
Judy Elledge, I heard one. Say it, please.
Oh, yeah, Judy is the director she's in the office. She's performing the role.
Right.
Judy Elledge, definitely.
Thank you.
When you're done with that question, I have one more comment.
I am done with that question. I think it's been suitably, clearly, and simply answered.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms.
Okay.
Torgerson?
My other comment really does have to do with appointments to the library board. You mentioned equity, diversity, inclusion, and that was a very important piece on how we asked people to represent their community. We looked at geographic, religious, ethnic, if people had children, small children, seniors. And so it's very key.
If folks on the line could please mute.
So it's very key to have as wide a representation as possible to represent the community for the library board.
Thank you, Ms. Torgerson. And thank you all for being here today. Special thanks to all who spoke with us, our guests. I do want to note for the record that Mr. Dunbar was excused. He has guard duty this week, and I neglected to mention that at the beginning of the work session. So again, thank you all for being here today. To the members, we will reconvene at 3:20 for our next, actually, it's a special meeting of the Rules Committee. So for those of you who won't be here for that, have a great weekend. We are adjourned.